It is my great pleasure today to welcome our panelists, former Acting Lieutenant Governor and State Senator Bill Ratliff, former Speaker of the House and current State Representative from Hale Center, Pete Laney. Neither of these lions of the legislature requires a true introduction to an audience like this, but there are a few things worth mentioning, of course. After graduating from UT with an engineering degree, which we'll forgive you for in the College of Liberal Arts, Bill Ratliff entered public service in 1988 when he was first elected as state senator from the venerable Senate District 1 in Mount Pleasant. During his distinguished legislative career, Bill Ratliff was named one of the state's best legislatures, 10 best legislatures, 5 times by Texas Monthly Magazine. And he built a well-earned reputation for tackling critical issues from public education to the state budget. In 1992, Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock named Ratliff chair of the Senate Education Committee, which is near and dear to our hearts, of course. And for the next 4 years, he was the state's leader in crafting public education legislation, helping to institute higher standards and greater accountability in public education. From 1997 to 1998, Ratliff was Senate President pro tem. On December 28th, 2000, Ratliff was elected acting lieutenant governor by his fellow members of the Texas Senate to fill the vacancy created when Rick Perry became governor after the selection of George Bush as president. It was the first time in Texas history that senators exercised their constitutional duty to elect one of their own as lieutenant governor and president of the Senate. Ratliff entered the race for lieutenant governor in 2002, but withdrew quietly, and continued his service in the Senate, his last term in 2003, which included 3 rather contentious special sessions before his announcing his retirement in 2004. And finally, and of particular interest and relevance to today's discussion, this past May, Bill Ratliff was one of 3 recipients nationally of the JFK Profile and Courage Award, given in no small part for his role in the 2003 redistricting discussion in this state. State Representative James E. Pete Laney is serving his 16th and last term in the Texas House of Representatives, following a record-tying 5 terms as Speaker of the House. In December, he announced that he would not seek re-election to the House seat he has occupied for more than 3 decades. A 4th-generation Hale County farmer, Pete Laney was born in Plainview, Texas. He graduated from Hale Center High School and earned his BS in agricultural economics from Texas Tech University, the Raiders. Laney was first elected to the Texas House in 1972. He served as House Administration Chairman under Speaker Billy Clayton, served on a variety of other committees during his tenure in the House, including criminal jurisprudence, Ways and Means, government organizations, elections, environmental affairs, and agriculture committees. Quite a storied record. In 1993, he was elected for his first term as Speaker. During his tenure as the Speaker of the House, Laney was praised by Republicans and Democrats alike for his fair leadership and even-handed approach to solving problems. Pete Laney has received numerous honors and awards for his public service. At Texas Tech, he met and subsequently married the former Nelda McQuinn, and they have 5 children, I believe. We have asked Governor Ratliff and Speaker Laney to share their thoughts about the consequences of the last round of redistricting with us today. Though challenges to the plan are scheduled to be heard before the Supreme Court this March, our focus today is on the consequences of changes of both the redistricting process and to the electoral arena shaped by that process. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Jim Henson, who produces the Texas Politics Project, to get things rolling. Thanks you very much.
Thanks, Brian. I just want to extend a personal thanks to both of you gentlemen for coming. I know you both came quite a distance, and we're real excited to have you here on the UT campus. As Associate Dean Roberts mentioned, we're here to talk about the consequences of redistricting. So, our plan is for both our guests to make a few remarks, and then we'll talk about them, and they'll talk about it a little bit among each other, and then we'll open it up for questions. So be thinking about questions, and I hope that you all take advantage of a rare opportunity to have such knowledgeable folks here with us on the campus. So again, thanks to both of you, and we flipped a coin, and Governor Ratliff's going to start.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to know that there are this many people interested in what most of us on the Hill really considered insider baseball, by and large. The public in general hears redistricting and they just kind of turn it off, but I am delighted to be here. And before I talk about the consequences, most of which I think are going to be bad, and I suppose it's well known in this room that I opposed the final redistricting plan and was sort of responsible for 2 of the special sessions, I guess you would say. Before I do that, let me say to you that, with all due respect to my colleague on my left, the Democrats sort of brought this on themselves. Gerrymandering didn't start with the Republican takeover of the legislature. If you look at congressional lines and go back to 1991 and look at Senator Johnson's district in Dallas County, I've forgotten what it looks like a Rorschach test, but it is probably, in the courts at least, during the arguments, was probably the example. There was another district somewhere in North Carolina, and the 2 of them were used as perfect examples of the most ridiculous gerrymandering in the United States. So it really didn't begin with the Republicans. I will say that I think that there are about 4 real tragedies resulting from the redistricting battle, and each one of those, I think, is going to result in consequences down the road for Texas, which I don't think are going to be good. The first tragedy, in my opinion, is the hypocrisy of my party, the Republican Party. For decades, the Republicans had been complaining about gerrymandering, about the fact that in the latter few years, the fact that while Texas was voting about 55% Republican, the congressional delegation was about 2/3 Democrat. And that was proof positive to the Republican hierarchy that gerrymandering was responsible for that, and therefore we had to fix it. They were forced to fix that problem. Well, they did. The problem is that I had hoped that when the Republicans came to power, that my party would be better than that, and that you would sit down and draw a map that was about 55% Republican, because that's the rationale that we used to criticize the old map. No, we didn't do that. As a matter of fact, there was an 1814 plan before the Senate. At one point, 18 Republicans, 14 Democrats, which is a little more than 55%. And the Republicans were the ones that defeated that one. And I was in the chair trying to pass this bill, and the Republicans defeated that because it wasn't partisan enough. So I was disappointed to see that we didn't handle it any better. We just simply, all of the forces were still there. They just switched sides. And now I think we adopted, what is it, a 1913 now? 1913? Or 2012, whatever it is. So far as I'm concerned, when it flips again, and it will, Texas will flip again in the future, maybe 10 years, the Democrats have every reason to do exactly the same thing, to go back and say, we're in control now, therefore we will get more than our appointed share, which is what the Republicans did. I think the second tragedy is the resulting partisan polarization in the legislature. And I think the most prominent example of that it really wasn't the exodus to Oklahoma or to Albuquerque. Those were strategic decisions made to try to defeat a bill. The partisanship that hurts me the most was the fact that I believe so strongly in the tradition of the Senate where it required 2/3 vote to bring any bill to the floor. Now, the reason that I believe so strongly in that is that I believe that that is one of the major reasons that the Texas legislature had always been a bipartisan body. Because in the Senate, you cannot be, in those days, you could not be strictly partisan and pass anything because nobody had a 2/3 vote. So you had to reach across the aisle and bring the other party with you. In the first two special sessions, that 2/3 vote tradition was held up. In the third special session, the lieutenant governor decided it is within his power to break at least 30 years of tradition and to not have what we call a blocker bill, and we can go into that if you want to, how that works, so that a simple majority of the Senate could pass this plan. I think it was a tragedy. I think it will have long-term detrimental effects on the legislature, on what we thought was a national reputation as being a bipartisan body. The third, maybe it's not a tragedy. Most of you all may not even consider it a bad thing. The redistricting plan that was finally approved, and the main reason that I voted against the plan was the fact that in order to get more Republican seats, the lines were changed so that rural parts of Texas were added to heavily Republican suburbs of Texas and new districts built where you could elect a Republican. But to do that, you had to put a controlling number of folks in the Republican suburbs. What that means is my part of Texas, Northeast Texas, who had always had 2 or 3 congressmen who represented rural interests, small towns, rural issues. My part of Texas will always be represented by somebody from either Plano or Garland or somewhere in the northeast segment of Dallas County. There is no more rural representation in East Texas, or there hardly is. And that's a tragedy. At least to us, to those of us that live in rural Texas, it's a tragedy because rural Texas is disappearing anyway, and when it is without a voice, it may hasten the disappearance. Finally, I think it was a serious mistake, and I hope that the Supreme Court agrees with me, to allow midterm redistricting. It is just insanity that in a state where maybe it's close to a balance where the House and Senate change every couple of 3 years, that every time you get a 1 vote margin, you go back and redistrict again. I don't believe that's what the Constitution, I don't believe that is what was the intent of the Constitution. The Constitution says that redistricting will occur or shall occur in the first session after the census. The Texas courts and the lower courts have said, well, it doesn't say that you can't do it otherwise. I think it is clearly the intent, clearly the intent. They didn't say you could either. I think it was clearly the intent of the founders, and those in my party who are so intent on strictly interpreting the Constitution according to original intent, I think would have to admit original intent, that was not the case. So I think that's another unfortunate result of the legislation, and I've gone longer than my 15 minutes probably. I said I wasn't going to do that.
I think you're doing just fine. Thank you. Speaker Laney.
Well, first of all, Governor Ratliff, I wasn't in charge in '91, and I wouldn't have messed with East Texas because that is rural Texas. And I'll just make a few comments about some of the things that Governor Ratliff said, and then I'd rather let y'all ask the questions. And find out what's on y'all's mind, but like Governor Ratliff, the process means a whole lot to me because the process is what made our state great. And the House had some processes to go through, but the Senate has always been, and I hate to say this being a House member, but the Senate always was a place that at some point reason would prevail. And it would give us an opportunity to do
the wrong reason.
well, yeah. but it and redistricting was changed because of the abolishment of the 2/3 rule for redistricting. His comment about midterm redistricting, it really wasn't even midterm. I mean, it was called midterm, and that's what is characterized as. But it was the next session after our redistricting session that we did, and to show you how involved people are, for those of you that hadn't had an opportunity to read a fellow by the name of Jim Ellis's memos that may be under a little scrutiny down the street here, but during the redistricting plan, one of his memos to after Jim Ellis's memo to Tom DeLay after he left Austin on January 14th, 2003, that DeLay left Ellis in charge. It said, one of the memos said, in the final redistricting plan, maximize the likelihood of Republican success and the Democrats' defeat whenever practical, unless it was clear that such a maximization was outlawed by existing law. Another memo said, the final plan is as partisan as the law allows. The U.S. Supreme Court will tell us just how partisan the law allows, I guess, and so I think that's what we'll see, that the Supreme Court, and I like Governor Ratliff, hopes that the Supreme Court does see that the Constitution says that you do it once a decade, because it will be a total disaster, because if you set a precedent of changing every time there is a change, and let me assure you, when it gets real partisan like it's getting now, it's going to change nearly every 2 or 3 years, or 3 or 4 years. The makeup of one body is, or maybe both of them, and even some of the statewide. And because you look at other states that have got so partisan that the team on the outside, all they have to do is be beginners and bring out the bad things about what's happening, and so you've got a situation that the more partisan it gets, the more it lends itself to change every time, and you'll be changing redistricting 3 or 4 times a decade. I mean, you're even though you keep it tied up in the courts, it'll still happen. I mean, the turmoil and the discontent among members, and what all of this has brought about is Governor Ratliff and I, although we're in different parties, we don't agree on everything. If he agreed with me on everything, he'd be perfect. But we know we're not. And you've got a situation that allowed he and I to work together when he was governor and when he was the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and working with my chairman of my Appropriations Committee. We worked out our problems. We worked out the situation. We didn't say, well, this is good for the Democrats or this is good for the Republicans. This is good for Texas, and it's good for the process, and it's good for the economic climate, or it's good for whatever reason we used. It was what was good for the process and good for Texas. The involvement that, as Governor Ratliff mentioned earlier, the more partisan the situation gets, the more that is not a possibility. It gets to be a gotcha world. And we can talk about a lot of things about the will of the House not being provided an opportunity to dictate things now, and the things that have happened in redistricting because of the change in the House redistricting, basically the House of Representatives redistricting, and to a lesser extent the Senate redistricting, that was done by the Legislative Redistricting Committee is what caused the things to happen in congressional redistricting. So you've got two scenarios here that caused the ultimate outcome. So I'd like to just stop there and spend the rest of the time trying to answer any questions that you might have, and Governor Ratliff and I will do our best to tell you something where neither one of he's not in office anymore, and I'm not running again. So you're probably going to hear.
Well, thank you, Speaker Laney. Before we open it up, I want to just ask you, you've both sort of had a negative kind of view of how this happened and the changes that have taken place. In the event the court upholds the plan, is there any way to put the genie back in the bottle? In other words, is there a way to kind of go back to the kinds of arrangements that you thought worked, both politically and in terms of how the institutions
Well,
work?
I think even if they say it's already done this time and just don't do it anymore, well, it's not just Texas that this is Pennsylvania, it's Colorado, it's all the other states, and the turmoil it would create in other states are the same as it will in Texas. Maybe we don't care as much about the other states, but you know, they can say that go back and fix it or don't ever do it again, and that's the least palatable to some of us, but that's a necessity.
I'm not sure you'll ever put the genie back in the bottle with regard to what I consider that sacrosanct issue of the 2/3 rule. And the reason is this. There will always be the perception, at least, hanging over the members of the Senate's head that if there is an issue that the Lieutenant Governor considers important enough, or the Governor considers important enough to call a special session, and they want it bad enough, that the precedence is already there. And it will be much easier next time to say, well, this is important too. We're going to have to do this. So I think once you let that genie out, even if you don't do it again, the threat is there. And so the members of the Senate are much less likely to exercise less likely to exercise that right, and much more likely to, much less likely to walk across the aisle and make those coalitions that they had to make before, because they know it, well, we might have the opportunity to do this without a 2/3.
Once you've used the weapon, it's just too tempting. You know, we were talking a little bit before we sat down about the very active primary season that's sort of upon us right now. Do you think redistricting contributed to the intensity of the primaries? And the fact that, you know, there's so much competition within the primaries now?
I'm not sure.
Well, the reason being, you just go back to redistricting. Now, here's a map of my legislative district pre-redistricting. It's the blue part. And my house is right in the middle of it. Now, we did that in '91, Governor Ratliff, and
That looks
it's
good.
a pretty nice district.
Very sweet work.
Very sweet work. Now, here's my district now. So, yes, I think the intensity of the people in this district, for those of you that are not familiar with all the state of Texas, this is north of Lubbock, this is north of Abilene, and this is southeast of Midland, and this is south of San Angelo. Kind of looks like a swastika. Whether that had anything to do with it or not, I don't know. But probably the reason there is intense debate in these districts because of redistricting, because some of the things, now, maybe your urban districts are not quite, but all the rural districts, as Governor Ratliff said, the people in West Texas are like the people in East Texas. they lost a congressman. They completely lost a congressman. It's not even in the suburb. It didn't even go to the suburbs. It just disappeared and went somewhere else. Partly because of population, but mainly because of the using part of the suburbs of Fort Worth and some of the suburbs of Dallas and some of the suburbs of San Antonio to create another district, another congressional district. So it took a congressman completely out of West Texas, and then some of the other ones have a tendency to have more population in the metropolitan areas than they do so yes, I think that kind of incensed the electorate to get involved, which, you know, no one, you know, there's usually not a mass bunch of people ask you to run. You know, 2 or 3 can ask you to run. That's a mandate, and 10,000 couldn't keep you from it. So, but once you made your mind up, but I think that's the redistricting, the recognition of what happened during redistricting did resonate with the electorate, I think.
Okay. I think we should open it up. I'm sensing some interest out there. Questions from the audience?
Jeff was shopping that around for a number of years in the Senate, and for probably 2 or 3 years, I tried to explain to Jeff that, in my opinion, as old Senator Carl Parker used to be fond of saying, you can't take politics out of politics. And what I tried to, Jeff's proposal was you have 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats appointed by parties, I assume, or by the members of the legislature, who come together and they must compromise because they're 4 and 4. My question to him was, with the pressures, they're going to have the same pressures that members of the legislature do, and from the parties, maybe even more. With those pressures, if they don't compromise, what's the opt-out? Do they flip a coin? How do they determine what they're going to do? And no matter where he went, his last proposal that I saw said it would go to the Supreme Court. And I said, Jeff, do you really think the Democrats are going to agree with 9 Republicans on the Supreme Court that, well, we'll take it to the Supreme Court? I couldn't come up with a tiebreaker. There might be one, but I just never could figure out how. And the alternative is to say, well, you have to appoint nonpartisan people. Where do you find those? One, and if you could, do you really want people who know nothing about politics, have never been involved in it, to start drawing lines? So I just never could figure out how to get it done. There may be a better way. I would love to think that there was.
Mr. Speaker, nonpartisan redistricting?
Well, I'm like Gabriel. I don't think it's possible to do redistricting nonpartisanly. And I think in 1974 might be an example, maybe not a real good one, but a little bit of an example. We created a commission to study redoing the Constitution. They brought that. The Constitutional Commission brought it to the legislature, and I'm not sure it resembled. And then it didn't pass. And then when it finally did pass the next session of the legislature in 1975, basically what the Constitutional Convention came up with, it was voted down by the people 2-1. So when we didn't take the politics out of that, and I think it's a real, well, first of all, how if the party selected the people, you'd have the most partisan people on the board to begin with, and if somebody else did, whether it be the governor or a selection process or some other way, there's no way that you're going to keep the politics out of that selection process. So, you know, in an ideal world, Senator Wentworth had a plausible idea.
I will say that in the last parts of the second special session, I voted for his plan just out of desperation. Because, you know, it's kind of like Kinky says, it couldn't be any worse.
If you go back to what I mentioned, Jim Ellis's memo was a while ago. Senator Wentworth and Governor Ratliff were two people that he mentioned in his memos readily that they were going to have problems with in the Senate.
Well, I'm sure Senator Wentworth will be like thrilled to also be mentioned in the same breath as Kinky Friedman. We're breaking new ground here. Other questions?
Well, I would have said, had I not gone through this last experience, I would have said, if you keep the 2/3 rule and maybe even put a 2/3 rule on the House, you're going to have to compromise. Having said that, we found out that that didn't happen, and that courts drew the plan. Or in the case of the House and Senate, the Texas House and Senate, the redistricting, what do we call it? The redistricting board finally had to draw the plan, and I didn't vote for it either. I suppose that my preference would be that if you could put the 2/3 in and give the legislature another shot at doing it on a bipartisan basis, if you tried it 2 or 3 times, maybe they would finally get the hint that if you don't do it, the court will. Of course, in this last round, one of the reasons that the Republicans in the Senate wouldn't agree to the Wentworth plan, which was the 1814, I believe, was that they felt that the redistricting board would be more favorable to them on the House and Senate, and they felt that the Republican courts would be more favorable to them on the congressional. Therefore, why compromise?
And I think Senator Sibley said that. I mean, he said that why should we do that? We've got 4 members of the redistricting board that are Republicans. Why let a House pass? And that was unprecedented for a one body not to allow the other body's redistricting plan to go through unscathed. But Senator Sibley said, and I'm quoting something he said, so I'm not putting words in his mouth. He said that, and you had, you've got the redistricting board made up of the land commissioner and the attorney general and the comptroller, and then it was Governor Ratliff and myself. 3 people that had absolutely no interest in the legislative process except during their budget time, we're making decisions on what one of them's now running as an independent for governor, and one's the United States senator. Another one is real happy where he is, and he wasn't there then. He's now lieutenant governor, so the land commissioner. So you've got that politics that was involved in coming to the judgment that a commission wouldn't be as good for them. Well, I don't think it would have received any kind of hearing like some of the other bills did.
Well, you wouldn't have anybody for it. The Republicans wouldn't be for it because they'd have to admit it wasn't a good idea if they're going to. If you got to get 2/3 vote of both houses before you put it on the ballot. Well, the Republicans would have to sort of admit that it wasn't a good idea. Therefore, we need to fix it, which they're not going to do. the Democrats are gonna say, well, why would we vote for it? The next time this happens, we're gonna be undoing what they've done. So neither one of them would actually see a great big positive in doing it. It ought to be done, but it was a little bit like rewriting the Constitution that Janelle and I tried a few years ago. I'm not even sure our wives were in favor of it.
One of them was. But it was out of sympathy, I think.
Probably, unless somehow in the Voting Rights Act we can get rural people declared a minority so that we get a little attention as well. Of course, if all the rural people would stand together and raise a little cane, they probably could affect it next time, but that's hard to say. The problem is that most people out there in the hinterlands consider it, as I say, insider baseball. They really don't understand until it happens to them. Until somebody in East Texas wakes up and realizes they have to drive to Dallas to see their congressman, rather than go to Tyler, which is where they should go, or to Jacksonville or wherever. What was the second half of it?
And so now does it mean that politically the cities and the rural
Oh, the
areas have...
inner cities. Yeah, well, I think that those commonalities, there are places where they have an affinity, they have the same agenda. I think by and large, they don't see it.
I think they've had that commonality all along because it's education, it's health care, and it's transportation. Not necessarily in that order. But now those major things end up taking a back seat to some of the other peripheral issues that divide inner city and rural. But basically, we have the same problems. And until we have a mindset in this day and time, that instead of building a $100 billion flyway over I-35 and 20 to increase the traffic flow in the urban areas, is take some of that money to the rural areas to enhance people to come to the rural areas and drive in the rural areas rather than keep impacting the urban areas. But I think redistricting has manifested itself into a mindset that you're going to have to move to the suburbs to access the system.
And I do believe, I grew up in West Texas and I live in East Texas, and the commonality there is, it's kind of the old theory of, the government ought to deliver the mail, protect the shores, and leave me the hell alone. And that's still alive and well in rural Texas. Now, when it comes to individual programs, they don't have that. I used to get tickled at Senator Bill Sims, who was the most conservative member of the legislature, bar none, until it came to mohair subsidies.
Those were very important.
Those are important.
And I think you're going to see that in Congress this time on the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill's coming up for renewal, and the rural areas have lost lots of representation, and the president's not real fond of agriculture subsidies, and so we'll have a battle.
Tough days for mohair.
Well, mohair's already gone. I think they've already taken care of mohair. It's us cotton farmers are after now.
The only way that the Republicans came into enough of a margin in the House and Senate to be able to push through the congressional redistricting was by the fact that they redrew the lines and had in the or in the 2000 elections,
2002
2002 elections, picked up enough seats that they could safely control the congressional redistricting process. So it was just a matter of numbers. They redrew the Texas legislative districts in a manner that they would gain enough votes that then they have they could even lose some of their members from local concerns and still pass the delay plan.
And it was very evident with DeLay's interest in the legislative redistricting. He was, when Governor Ratliff and I were on the committee of the redistricting board, he was very visible and involved in our redistricting at the time, based on the fact that they were doing things for his benefit, or for congressional benefit for redistricting of Congress. Because, and it worked because Texas was the only state in the nation that picked up Republican seats in Congress that had any kind of positive pickup of, I think it was 6 seats, wasn't it? That Texas picked up.
Yeah, it was clearly about a 4-year plan. The
Yeah.
first 2 years was get more than enough control in both houses of the legislature, so that then in the next 2 years they could redraw the congressional lines and pick up those extra seats.
Well, I think it was going to happen. I think that was on their mind from the very beginning. There was a lot of discussion saying, "Oh, I don't think that's going to happen," by some of the leadership, but they knew all the time that they were going to do it. All you've got to go back and look at some of these emails and memos that have been exposed lately, that and the terminology that was used about why it was important to do legislative redistricting first. And I think it was, it may have not have been on the public's mind, but it sure was on a few consultants' minds.
I really don't know whether Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, I think, I was in many of the rooms, and I think he was pretty genuine when he was saying he didn't want to do it that time. Because he'd just been elected. He really didn't know how bloody awful a redistricting battle was, but he had heard that it was pretty bad. And I think, frankly, he would have loved to have had that cup passed from his lip, but the powers that be, I think, knew that it was going to happen. Well, I think, unfortunately, many of those people who, the additional Republicans that were added during redistricting are ones who will follow the lead of, maybe I could say blindly follow the lead in some cases, of the Republican leadership in not wanting to provide more funding for public schools. I mean, that's essentially what the battle is. Do we provide more funding, or do we squeeze more blood out of the turnip that we have? And I think that's where the problem has been now for the last 3 or 4 years, and it made it more difficult, I think. Oh, I personally don't think consolidation has any legs at all. That's not going to happen. Consolidation is the third rail of Texas education politics.
Behind basketball and football.
That's right. there's always talk of it, but when it gets serious, the fallout from forced consolidation would be so horrendous that the legislature won't touch it, in my opinion.
Mr. Speaker, you want to add anything?
Well, although a lot has been mentioned, it's only been mentioned by the individuals that have a suburban school that that their constituency would not necessarily be impacted. I don't know of anything that causes more heartburn for individual members of the legislature than irate people that you even discuss school consolidation, whether it be a school that's got 5 people left in. If it's their idea to consolidate, that's one thing, but if it's your idea to consolidate, it's bad. I think that there's been a misperception that these districts are Republican districts. I've been elected for the last 2 terms, well, actually the last 10 terms, from a district that, quote, is a 60 to 65% Republican district as a Democrat, which tells me that it is not a Republican district. It tells me that there's a certain number of Republicans that are going to vote for Republican, and there's a certain number going to vote for the Democrat regardless, and that may be about the same percentage, about 25% apiece. And then there's about 50% that are going to think for themselves and pick out which candidate. Redistricting may have an effect on that, in that you have changed the dynamics of pure Republican to elect someone that in a primary that can't get elected in the general election. The same thing happened to Democrats many years ago. We got where we selected people that were really, really good Democrats, but they couldn't get elected in the fall. So I think that's happening, and it's reflected in maybe some of the races around the state this time.
One of the phenomenon in redistricting is that the power that the group that gets to draw the lines inevitably overreaches. And to overreach, you have to you try to cut a district a little too fine. You say, well, if instead of getting 70%, let's drop that to 60%, take those other ones and go in another district. And when you cut it too fine, and then an issue like public education finance comes along, where, as Pete says, only about 30-35% of those people are passionate on either side. The great middle out there is the one that actually elects these people. You see them make the decision, and when there's a passionate issue comes along, that district doesn't meet the drafter's expectations. Pete represented a Republican district. I represented a Democrat district in the Senate for 15 years. It was kind of a lightning strikes thing in 1989 that put me there, and the Democrats, the Yellow Dog Democrats, decided that the sky didn't fall, so let me stay.
Well, and it's a good example is public school vouchers. I mean private school vouchers. Although we had a Republican governor, a Republican lieutenant governor, a Republican Senate, according to Dr. Leininger, I was the whole problem. Well, I hadn't been the problem for 4 years now, and they still hadn't got vouchers. So, and I've never met the man, but he sure has spent a lot of money trying to defeat me. But that's a good example of that group in the middle. They're going to say, "Hey, let's look at what's right." Well, no, I think they started trying to make this move in a long time ago, in 94, 96, 98. They had 8 and 98, and all the different cliches that went along with the redistricting. I mean, with a election cycle, trying to get a majority, looking forward to redistricting. I think redistricting was their final goal, but they started it actually in '94, in the '94 election.
Yeah, but the springboard that allowed them, I mean, they'd been trying to do it for some time. The springboard that allowed them to do it was George W. Bush. He had coattails. I don't know that Texas has ever seen coattails like that. If you remember, if y'all were old enough to remember, every candidate, every Republican candidate had a picture of them with George W. Bush in their brochure and on their television. I mean, it was solid gold, and that's what allowed this strategy to work.
So you'd say if Mr. Gore had won, that maybe none of this had happened?
Not necessarily. George W. was every bit as popular, maybe more popular as governor than as president.
Yeah, he'd have still been gold here.
Yeah, well, and probably more gold than after he got elected president. But you had a situation that that because of the people, Governor Ratliff and myself and Governor Bullock and now Judge Rob Janelle and all of us that worked together. I mean, Bullock and Governor Bush and I had Governor Bush and I had breakfast every Wednesday morning for 6 years. Governor Ratliff and I carried on that tradition every Wednesday morning when we were both in town or during the session. Had breakfast every Wednesday morning to discuss the problems and try to work things out. And it so I guess we if we had been adversaries with the governor and not let him be as visible as he was and have the influence he had with the Republican hierarchy, things might have not have changed so quickly. It probably would have, but it might not have been so quickly.
I wonder if that breakfast is still going on now.
I'd hate to eat the food.
It's not exclusively the Republicans. You had some Democrats who cooperated with the leadership who the Democrats went after for the same reason, but it's the same kind of infectious problem that results from the gradually increasing partisanship that we've seen over these years. I tell people in my district that I was privileged to serve in the Texas legislature in the Camelot days of the Texas legislature. I really was, because 5 years before I got here, there weren't any Republicans, so the Democrats fought with themselves. 2 years after I left, the Democrats are started on the sidelines and the Republicans are fighting with themselves. Right in the middle, we had Pete Laney, George Bush, Bob Bullock. I can honestly say that in all of my years serving with that when the three of them were at the helm of the three entities, I never had a meeting with one of the three of them where the political fallout from a decision was even discussed. It was not a factor. The discussion was, whether it was Bob Bullock or George Bush or Pete, and hopefully myself, the discussion was what was the best idea, what was the best course for the state of Texas. and never even discussed was the partisan fallout.
I think we all went by the adage that if you'll take care of what's right, the politics take care of itself. And you do what you think's right for your district, you do what you think's right for Texas. It's amazing how you can explain it if you're doing what's right, you can explain it. Now, you might not explain it to some people's satisfaction, but you can explain it.
I wish I could say it was going to drive it a more positive way. I haven't seen it turn yet. The direction that I feared back when it was happening. It's a little hard to say whether there were others who sympathized with my concerns. There were, as in anything else, there were all ranges of the zealots who thought if you can get 25 seats, so be it, to those who, I don't know whether it was a concern on the ethics of doing it as much as it was the practicality of, can we really, is this going to blow up in our face? Can we really accomplish it? What will the court say about it? Will they strike it? Most of the consideration was what can we do that the court will uphold, and that probably consumed most of the strategy sessions.
Well, and I think that you had a lot of folks that have just now realized what Governor Ratliff mentioned a while ago. They cut some of the districts so thin. They are just now realizing, because maybe there's not a George Bush on the ballot ahead of them to help, that they may be in trouble in their district because they voted for a redistricting bill that was actually, for their district, was worse than maybe one of the Democrat bills. But it sounded good at the time, but they forgot that there was only 4,000 people or 3,000 people voted in Republican primary in that district, which means there may not have been but 3,000 or 4,000 in Democrat primary either, but that means that there's 15,000 or 20,000 people that either just didn't care or can be persuaded to go either way. So they realized it after the fact and were told it'd be taken care of and then forgot about it.
Interestingly enough, the reason I said a while ago that the lure of cutting them a little too thin is irresistible. Democrats did exactly the same thing in 1991. They cut them. They were losing a few seats, so they wanted to cut them as close as they could, and they cut them too close. And that was one of the things that started the trend.
I think that there's 100 and out of 150, there's 148 good people. I don't know who those other two are, but there will be somebody sitting in the chair that I think will learn from what has happened. Now, like Governor Ratliff said, it might not be learning enough, but it will be. I think the public's going to demand a little more of their elected official. I think there's a good indication of that in the polls that may or may not be accurate, that the positive nature of the legislative process, and I'll speak when Governor Ratliff and I were trying to run things, the positive nature of the legislature. I mean, the polls that showed that it had over a 50%, maybe as high as some of them as high as 60% positive, which was unheard of. Now the positive nature of the legislature in the polls are showing from 25 to 35% positive. Well, that means that the public is interjecting themselves into what we're doing. Now, whether that changes anything or not, but I think you'll see a change on a national level on some ethics legislation, which may or may not do anything but make good campaign rhetoric, but and you're going to probably see that in Texas too, and make it more make the system more transparent. Where that's, you know, I hate to say that should happen because it shouldn't have to happen, but I think the electorate will dictate a more responsive redistricting, more responsive. It'll still be political, but there'll be a lot more people watching it in 2011.
As far as those that are advocating doing away with the 2/3 rule, it's my sincere hope for the state of Texas that they're not successful. I hope what happens is what I saw happen routinely when I was in the Senate. You'd have a House member who would run for the Senate and be elected and come over, and the first time we explained to him what the procedure was, almost universally the reaction was, "What? Why would you give up the right for the majority to simply push through whatever they want?" And some of them remain of that opinion for 2 or 3 years, but almost inevitably, I think there's one there right now that continues to advocate for that. Inevitably, though, most of them begin to understand and realize the value of the 2/3 and what it means to the collegiality and the workability of that body. I hope that when these members, if they are elected, when they come to the Senate, that they will also understand the value of it. I think it would be a horrible thing for the state of Texas.
And I think most House members that have been around any length of time respect the fact that the Senate has that 2/3 rule, because it gives you an opportunity to say, hey, you know, there's no way that we're going to be able to do this without compromising a little bit because of the Senate's 2/3 rule, and it helps us in our negotiations in the House for them to have the 2/3 rule.
One last thing, with the political season upon us, are you going to miss it, Pete? Do you miss it?
Oh, at times, kind of like an old fire horse, you know, but not enough to try to come back.
Mr. Speaker, how are you feeling?
I don't think that you can ever not miss something that you've been doing for nearly 34 years. I'm sure on the second Tuesday in January of 2007 that I will have some thoughts, but I have had an opportunity for a young guy from a town of 2,000 people, and I don't live in town, to be able to come and serve in the best position that there is in state government anywhere, and that's being Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives, shows you what this state can afford somebody. And I have no regrets, and I just have all the admiration in the world for this process, and just hope that it's not jeopardized at any point in time.
Thank you very much, for both of you, for coming. It's been a great afternoon. I've had a great time. I think everyone else has too, and you an open invitation to come back any other time.